On May 20th, 2019, President Xi Jinping came to Yudu County in Jiangxi to pay tribute at the monument, marking the start of the long march of the Central Red Army.
长征艰苦卓绝啊，那几乎是在绝境中绝处逢生。凭的是什么？革命理想高于天。中国共产党要不忘初心，全中国人民要不忘初心，不忘我们的革命宗旨、革命理想，不忘我们的前辈革命先烈，不要忘了我们的父老乡亲。
We commenced the attack. Chiang Kai-shek is making desperate efforts to unite the various provinces of China, many of which are torn by internal dissension. And if he can't do it one way, he tries another, including bombs.
After 4 failed efforts at encirclement and eradication, the KMT army sped up its 5th such attempt, targeting the CPC's Central Revolutionary Base area. Tier upon tier, over 3,000 blockhouses were erected to enclose the Red Army and its base area like a spiderweb. Chiang Kai-shek made an analogy. He said the CPC's revolutionary base area was like a pond in which the soldiers of the Red Army were stranded like fish. The KMT's web of blockhouses, meanwhile, would act like a giant net made to catch the fish as the pond was drained. At the same time, Mao Zedong, who had led the Red Army to victory against the first 3 of the encirclement and eradication campaigns, had been excluded from the inner circle of the military leadership. Bo Gu was head of the Provisional Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee. He put Otto Braun, the military advisor sent by the Communist International, in command. Having scant knowledge of the situation in China, they simply applied conventional positional warfare tactics with disastrous consequences.
下面很反映的很多情况了，说这样打法简直不行，伤亡很大，部队也反应很强烈，但是上面不行不听。
彭德怀骂这个李德叫湖南话，叫宰卖牙田心不疼，就是宰就是儿子。 牙就是父亲，儿子卖父亲的田呢，心痛。
To keep revolutionary forces intact for the war against the Japanese in the north, in October 1934, the Central Red Army, the 25th Army Group, the 4th Front Army, and the 2nd and 6th Army Groups began a series of maneuvers that would eventually become the Long March. The KMT set up 4 defensive lines in anticipation of Central Red Army attacks to break the siege. After Communist forces breached 3 of them, Chiang Kai-shek himself assumed command from Nanchang. He sent an army of 400,000 to both sides of the Xiangjiang River, attempting to wipe out the Red Army in one fell swoop.
我们8万多人出发。 到过了香港以后，我们还要多少？3万多。
To provide cover for the main force, the 34th Division fought as a rear guard for the entire army and ended up losing most of its men. The division's commander, Chen Shuxiang, was injured and captured. He took his own life by pulling his intestines out of a wound in his stomach. He was 29 years old. Chen's captors cut off his head and hung it above the Xiaowu Gate of Changsha City. This was just across from his birthplace and family home. Over the past few decades, at the site of the Battle of Xiangjiang River, remains of fallen soldiers of the Red Army have been discovered one after another. The fighters have been accorded due respect. Upon the graves of these hitherto unrecognized heroes are rocks of various shapes. Each stone has a form that is as unique as the life it represents. They were war heroes, as well as sons, husbands, fathers, and brothers. Before he died, a soldier from Ruijin told his comrades, "Keep moving and leave me be. Let us know when you've won your victory."
舍生忘死的红军将士，靠什么？靠他的理想信念。成功的奥秘就在这里。革命理想高于天，这样才能够不断的取得奇迹般的胜利。
In January 1935, events took another historic turn in Zunyi, Guizhou province, when the CPC Central Committee held an enlarged meeting of the Politburo. Mao Zedong was co-opted to the Standing Committee of the Political Bureau. After the meeting, Jiang Wenqian replaced Bo Gu as General Secretary. A triumvirate made up of Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, and Wang Jiaxiang was put in charge of all military operations. The Zunyi Conference established Mao Zedong as the de facto leader of the CPC and Red Army. Marxism became the party's guiding ideology. It was here that the first generation of CPC leaders began to take shape, with Mao Zedong at its core. A new era of the CPC working independently to solve domestic problems began. The Zunyi Conference had, at a critical moment, saved the party, the Red Army, and the Chinese Revolution. At a moment of life or death, it was a turning point in the history of the CPC. On September 3, 1963, when receiving Indonesian guests, Mao Zedong made an enlightening remark. Having a teacher bears its pros and cons, he said. To read and write and think by oneself also leads to the truth. It took us decades to understand the situation of China, and the Zunyi Conference was when we first learned the importance of standing on our own feet. Having reassumed command of the Red Army, Mao Zedong directed the historic battle of the four crossings of the Qirshui River.
石头池水是整个红军长征了，摆脱蒋介石的围追堵截，很重要的一段。把蒋介石的队伍主要集中到长江北岸、长江南岸、遵义这一段的。
把蒋介石搞到分道边相的话，哎，一杀我们走了。毛就自己讲，石头之水是他第一之作，但是我们讲石头之水是保住了红军。
陈氏双脚走天下，四渡之水出奇兵。 都将天堑冲飞渡，逼宁贵阳的狂鸣。敌人骑甲丢烟枪啊，捉进城城赶入城。
Later, the Central Red Army passed through the Yi-populated area without incident before crossing the Jinsha River deftly and the Dadu River forcefully. It captured the Luding Bridge and then arrived in Jiajin Mountains, rising to a height of 4,000 meters. The mountain's peak was snow-capped all year round, and the air was thin. There was no trail to follow, and not a soul to be seen. Somewhere on the mountain path above the snow line, a tomb has been built to commemorate the fallen Red Army soldiers. Carved on the headstone are accounts of the soldiers' will and determination, as noble as the great mountain itself. In June 1935, after crossing over the Jiajin Mountains, the Central Red Army finally joined forces with the 4th Front Army. But the party and Red Army then came up against two major challenges: the unforgiving natural environment and dissension within the ranks. The grasslands that the Red Army now found itself on were between the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau and the Sichuan Basin, at an altitude of over 3,500 meters. It was a sparsely populated area of marshes and unpredictable weather. To evade enemy encirclement, there was no choice but to march north through the grasslands.
毛主席他讲，蒋委员长啊，估计我们不敢冒这个险，我们偏要冒这个险。
Though successful, the maneuver was achieved at extremely high cost. Under harsh conditions, the grasslands crossing became a grueling high-altitude expedition.
Cool, 确实苦，一个是路不好走，还有一个是没得粮食。那个路旁边有个小水荡荡。 这么大的，踩下去就起不来，连马就起不来了啊！最后边就牺牲了。
我们不是有多少同志饿死冻死的？
还有的什么呢？中间有一堆火灰，周围呢有一圈尸体。 就是说，天气很冷，人们都在那儿捡烤火，最后都冻死了。哎呦，看到难受啊！所以我们那个时候只好是回内惜别战友，大家看到都难受啊！死那么多人，那都是真正的革命者。
On his way across the grasslands, Zhou Enlai suffered from a high fever caused by an acute hepatic abscess. Chen Geng and Yang Li San volunteered to carry him all the way on a stretcher. A decade later, upon hearing news of Yang Li San's death, Zhou Enlai was deeply saddened and personally acted as a pallbearer. Afterwards, he said with great emotion, "Communists are atheists, but we are not heartless. It was Yang Li San who carried me out of hell. Dead men would turn over in their graves if I didn't walk him to his final resting place." In the living hell that Zhou referred to, fighters were dropping in their thousands. In August 1935, after 7 days of marching across the grasslands, the Central Red Army finally arrived at the Banyo River. Once over, Peng Dehuai sent men back for the 700 soldiers lagging behind. The men looked through binoculars and saw the soldiers sitting still, back to back. It wasn't until they came close enough that they discovered the soldiers had all stopped breathing. The incident marked the biggest loss of life during the grasslands traverse. To this day, the 700 martyrs remain where they fell, the relentless roar of the Banyo River accompanying their voyage into eternity, their names and deeds proclaimed in glory forever. Incomplete statistics suggest more than 10,000 Red Army officers and soldiers died in the vast grasslands. Local Tibetans now refer to the wildflowers that flourish in the area as Red Army blossoms. In 1960, the American journalist Edgar Snow asked Mao Zedong what the darkest moment of his life had been. Mao answered, "The fight against Jiang Guotao when crossing the grasslands in the Long March of 1935. After the Central Red Army and the 4th Front Army joined forces, Jiang Guotao, counting on his superiority in number of guns and men, openly contended for the CPC leadership.
四反面的力量到怎样的混觉小了，就起了野心了，就想担任头头。
At a Politburo meeting convened in Lianghekou, Sichuan province, the CPC Central Committee's political bureau decided to march north. Contradicting them, Jiang Guotao insisted on heading south in an attempt to establish an alternative central leadership. On September 9, 1935, Mao Zedong and other leaders made a prompt decision to head north, leading the 1st, the 3rd Armies and the Military Commission. After pushing through the narrow mountain pass at Lazikou, they exited the Yangtze River Basin and entered the Yellow River Basin. At the time, Mao and his comrades had no idea that on the Los Plateau, hundreds of kilometers away, the party's revolutionary forces had been continuously growing in strength. Beginning in 1931, comrades Liu Zhedang, Xie Zicheng and Xi Zhongxun led the 26th and 27th Red Army groups. Through a long and strenuous effort, and with the support of many locals, they established the Shanxi Gansu Revolutionary Base. In November 1934, the 25th Red Army Group, led by Cheng Zihua and Xu Haidong, left the Hubei, Hunan, Jiangxi Revolutionary Base area and made its own long march to arrive in the Shanxi Gansu Revolutionary Base area. The military situation in North Shanxi was published on a newspaper. In Hadapu, a small town in South Gansu, a man who had travelled a great distance to read the news was none other than Mao Zedong himself.
是第一呢，马这个山脉的风景，哎，一看知道，哎呦，山脉有风景呐，大家高兴得很呢。
Early October 1935, from high up in the Liupan Mountains, Mao Zedong, who was then leading the Red Army on a rapid march to North Shanxi, could almost see the vast Los Plateau down below. The sky is high, the clouds are pale. We watch the wild geese vanish southward. If we fail to reach the Great Wall, we are not men. We who have already measured 20,000 li. High on the crest of Mount Liupan, red banners wave freely in the west wind. Today we hold the long cord in our hands. When shall we bind fast the grey dragon? On October 19, 1935, the Central Red Army arrived in Wuqi, a small town within the Shaanxi Gansu base area, marking the victorious end of a year-long march. Mao Zedong later commented, the significance of North Shaanxi was twofold. One, it was the destination of the Long March. And two, it was the starting point of the war of resistance against Japanese aggression. Without it, there would have been no victory for the Chinese Revolution. On their journey south, meanwhile, Zhang Guotao and his troops suffered from heavy attacks by the KMT army. Finally, at the insistence of Zhu De, He Long and Ren Bishi, they joined forces with the Second Front Army and headed north. Li Zhongchuan, a political officer of the Fourth Front Army, met his mother before crossing the high grasslands. 9 members of the Li family were revolutionary fighters. His father had died fighting against the KMT forces. His mother, 54-year-old Wang Lixue, enlisted herself and her children in the Red Army. Mortally ill, she cast a lengthy gaze upon her son, but said nothing. After completing the crossing, Li Zhongchuan was told by his younger brother that their mother had not made it. She had been buried in the grasslands.
我心情非常难过，一转弦子我是看过，我为什么不把妈妈抱着像得像鬼？我说弟弟妹妹，我说我们现在已经是没有爸爸妈妈的孩子了，但是我们的山地还有更伟大的母亲，我们的党员，我们的毛主席，我们去找他老人家。
In October 1936, the Second and Fourth Front Armies arrived at Huining and Jiangtaibu in Gansu, where they joined forces with the First Front Army. The link-up of the 3 main Red Army forces marked the triumphant end of the Long March. The Red Army, having fought some 600 battles, crossed over 40 mountains and nearly 100 rivers, was in its own right a legend in the history of warfare. Mao Zedong remarked on the significance of the Long March. He called it a manifesto, a propaganda force, a seeding machine that culminated in victory for us and defeat for the enemy. After arriving in North Shaanxi, Li Zhongchuan and his siblings took a family photo without their mother. Like the Lis, many newly arrived Red Army soldiers chose to commemorate the end of their arduous and epic expedition with a photo. In 1936, the American journalist Edgar Snow also took a photo of Mao Zedong. It was a world debut for the leader of the CPC and the Red Army. The photo was later included in a book documenting Snow's first-hand experiences and interviews, a book he named Red Star over China. Also included in the book are a great number of photos of Red Army soldiers who, having narrowly escaped death, were about to march towards the front to fight the Japanese. Their clothes were ragged, but their spirits were high, simply because they believed that, having survived the long march, there was no force on earth that could stop them.
从长夜到日出，走过千山万水的路，每一步都是信仰足迹，烙印下新中国版图。从贫弱到富强，走出复兴，为业征途，每一天都有奋斗牺牲，只为人民拥抱幸福，凭着心中坚定信念，敢叫日月换新天，循关漫道，风雨无阻，汇聚起中华儿女同向前。从贫弱到富强，走出复兴。